I'm Alex Weathersby, and this is my web series review for Shakes. Shakes is a TV-style mashup. It is set in the little town of Shakes. It's also a modernization of Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, and Much Ado About Nothing. Obviously, all these plays are written by the same person, William Shakespeare. Elements of these three plays are all kind of mashed together. Some elements of this web series that I really liked were the modernization of certain elements. Beatrice and Benedict's characters, their romantic rivalry has been updated to include a professional rivalry, specifically within the realm of journalism. So I really liked that because I felt it added a lot more to their history and to their characters, just in terms of who they are as people, what their goals are. I feel like that's sometimes difficult to do when you're doing literary inspired web series, because there is that having the characters sort of created for you, and sometimes I feel people sort of lose out on taking the opportunity to add in some extra characterization and elements to some very well-known characters. Much Ado About Nothing in particular has been an extremely common literary work to base a web series on, so it was nice to sort of see this web series do something a little different. Similarly, Hamlet's descent into paranoia is played with a lot of nuance. I think it has definitely a lot more callbacks to mental illness than the original work. And obviously I love the modernization of Romeo and Juliet. In this web series, they're treated a lot more shallowly. Their romance is sort of played off as this silly kid stuff, which is how a lot of English teachers would like us to look at the original text, but is sort of in a lot of other media played very straightforward. So it was nice to see a modern take on these web series and their themes and plots. I also thought that the way that these three literary works were mashed up and how the characters filled in the roles of other characters was really, really good and really interesting. I thought it was very creative how Ophelia sort of played both, obviously, her own role, but was a stand-in for Hero in terms of the Benedict and Beatrice part. An example, there's a scene where Ophelia is sort of taken down a couple pegs by Hamlet, who she's only trying to help. He definitely reads her the riot act. Beatrice comes in and sort of stands up for her and tries to take care of her, and this definitely mirrors in the text of Much Ado About Nothing how Beatrice stands up for Hero and eat his heart in the marketplace situation that happens with Hero and Claudio. So it was really cool to see how those roles kind of filled in, and Juliet plays a little bit more of a mischievous role. I definitely thought it was very interesting and innovative how they took all these different stories and mashed them up. And it brings up a really interesting point of the archetypes within Shakespeare's works and how some characters do carry very specific traits based on their role in the story. What did the tragic women characters versus the strong women characters, and complicated male characters versus the love interest male characters who win in the end. So that was really interesting. I also liked the references to the original play. I feel like it is definitely a loss to have a literary inspired work if you don't sort of take your opportunity to throw some puns in there and some references to the original text. Obviously, I felt like that was very well done, and the acting for the most part was pretty good. I enjoyed watching this web series. Some things that I didn't really care for this web series was the lack of characterization for Romeo and Juliet in comparison with the other characters. Perhaps this was intentional because in their story they're very limited and have a very limited knowledge of each other specifically. Romeo does appear in one of the other works that this company has done, so that was Weird Sisters, which I already have a review for. Romeo does appear in that in kind of a surprise cameo, which I really enjoyed. But in this series I was expecting a little bit more of an equal balance between the three stories, and I feel the Romeo and Juliet story was definitely put on the back burner. So I was a little disappointed to see that it wasn't quite as even as I was expecting with seeing a mashup. I also didn't particularly care for the lack of diversity in this web series. There are no LGBTQ characters, there's very few, if any, characters of color, so I would have preferred to see a little bit more. I also felt that parts of this web series were definitely rushed, which I can see how when you're mashing up three separate stories, obviously you're not going to include every single element. That would probably hurt you more than would help you, unless your web series is extremely long and planned out. But it did feel a little short to me, and the thing things that were definitely included in the web series that were taken from the original text. I've seen a lot before. Like I said, Much Ado About Nothing specifically has been done in quite a few web series. I've watched at least 5, and Hamlet's also picking up. I've watched at least 1 other Hamlet-inspired web series. I've watched, I think, 2 or 3 Romeo and Juliet-inspired web series. So I feel sometimes the parts that were picked out, I would have liked to see maybe a little more ingenuity, a little more creativity, rather than picking out the obvious options, so to speak, especially when a mashup where they had the option to choose which parts of the play they were going to engage with. So even though I think they handled it really well, it was a little bit repetitive based on what I have seen before. I would watch this web series if you really like Shakespeare. Shakespeare is pretty much the go-to when it comes to literary inspired works, along with Jane Austen. Those two probably make up the vast majority of literary inspired web series that I have seen. If you like literary inspired web series, then I would definitely give this one a try. You're kind of getting more bang for your buck with the 3 separate stories. And interestingly enough, because of the mixing genres, it still happens to work very well, even though Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet are tragedies, whereas Much Ado About Nothing is very much a comedy. So it's kind of cool to see how that genre is mixing. So if you really are interested in seeing that, then this might be a really good web series for you to try. If you like ensemble casts with a very complex plot that kind of intermingles, then again, definitely would give this web series a try. Romeo and Juliet is kind of left a little by the wayside, but the characters all have very interesting roles to play. They all mesh with each other very well, and they all fit different archetypes that are very common in a lot of Shakespeare-style works. So if you're really into that, then I would definitely give this one a try. If you're very sensitive to discussions of suicide or murder, because Hamlet's plot definitely takes a big portion of the time and of the suspense, then I would maybe skip this web series. Especially the final scene can be very jarring if you're not expecting it. If that's just something that you're very sensitive to, you prefer just a straight comedy, you're not really looking for anything that might trigger some uncomfortable feelings for you, then I would maybe skip this web series. If you dislike modern adaptations, especially considering that we look at everything through a modern lens, obviously the people who are creating these web series did not live back then, so sometimes through a modern adaptation, certain things can get lost, certain contexts, certain nuances that maybe were very obvious back when the work was created, but now has gotten lost over the passage of time and through the very specific lens through which we look at it, then you're probably not going to enjoy this web series. I'm not really sure if there really is a web series adaptation for either of these that is faithfully done or set in the time period where the original work was set, but there's probably miniseries and movies and various other contexts in which if that's more your speed, then you can definitely find it somewhere else. If you take Romeo and Juliet extremely seriously, so if they're kind of your romantic ideal and you don't find what happened between them to be juvenile or impulsive, then you're probably not going to like the take that this web series has on them and their relationship. So for that reason, you may not enjoy this web series as much. I don't know. Especially if you're a Juliet fan and you have a very specific way of seeing Juliet. Her character is definitely the most unexpected part of this web series for me, so that may be something that puts you off rather than brings you more into the web series. As always, I will put a link to the web series in the description box, and I'll also put the link to my Tumblr if you have any questions or comments for me or recommendations for other web series you think that I should try. And you can always comment on this YouTube video if you think anything I said was off base, if you agreed or disagreed, if I made a mistake somewhere. Sometimes I review these quite a while after I have watched them, so it's possible that there's some fact or something that kind of slips through when I'm doing a review. But yeah, I will see you next time.